Even the cutest little Shih Tzu that sits on the couch all day long, they still have all of that wonderful essence of painted wildness in them. The more we allow them to train us, the more fun we have with them. And the happier they are, and the deeper the bond of the relationship. Without water in this world, we wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't be in these bodies. It's a healing in itself when you recognize what those wounds are and how you've navigated them.
Welcome to HDL Podcast, where we dive deep into the mysteries of humanity and spirit. And today, I'm super excited. I read this book called Know Your Dog's True Nature by Elizabeth Ann Johnson. And it's a book that unveils the ancient 5 elements, and we're going to get into those. But it's a way to decode your dog's soul, and I think maybe even your own. And one of those wagging tails and quirky barks are none other than a sacred map to a healing connection. And I think for us as pet owners, it connects us to the lot of heart of who we have forgotten we are. So from rescue pups to wise old souls, Elizabeth's here to reveal how our canine companions guide us home to ourselves. So we're going to step into this hour of wonder, and I'm going to make a joke here, guys. Pause and all. Welcome. I appreciate you coming on the HDL Podcast, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thank you for having me. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, I want to get into, because your book is just so amazing. Encourage people. We have it in the link below, so go ahead and purchase it right now. Support the show, support Elizabeth. You know, we want to always support spiritual authors that are presenting truth. But your book opens with a poetic nod to the ancient bond between humans and dogs. And it says, dogs too have endured and thrived beside us, as we have beside them. And so from a spiritual lens, what do you see as like the soul level pact we've made with dogs from centuries ago?
Great question. I think the centuries ago part is really about kindred respect. You know, here we were two beings from nature, because us humans are part of nature as well. And we find each other. And there was a feeling of safety, I truly believe, that came across, you know, cautiousness and safety, and definitely a huge piece of curiosity in that pact. You know, like, oh, well, what can I give you and what can you give me? You know, and I think we still walk in those worlds today, but not as much as we did. It was 50-50, I think, way back when, because we were looking for someone to, you know, kill food for us, basically, and find food for us. And they were looking for someone to maybe process that food or keep them warm or just be a companion. And keep them safe sometimes from other animals, other people. So I think that's the old pack, and I think our new pact is really to strive for hearing their voice. So that voice that they came to us with is still in. There's still a tainted feral wildness to them, but it's very diluted at this point, but you can still see it. And when you see feral dogs and you work with feral dogs or rescue dogs that have had difficult times, you can still pick out little veins of that. And even the cutest little Shih Tzu that sits on the couch all day long, they still have all of that wonderful essence of that tainted wildness in them. And I like to say to people, you know, keep your dog outside as much as you can. Not keep, but put them outside, because their senses, and we talk about this a lot in the 5 elements, senses for each element, are strong and they live by their senses. That's how they made a living way back when. And so we should allow them to stimulate those senses all the time, I feel, as much as possible. That's safe and healthy for the animal. So, and that's part of their voice. You know, it really is. It's just a piece of a dog's voice. And the more we listen and the more we learn and the more we take in, we're always trying to train them. The more we allow them to train us in these aspects, the wildness, the feralness, the more fun we have with them. And the happier they are, and the deeper the bond of the relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And in the book, you go into this elemental awakening And you write, learning the ancient art of the five elements is like having, and I want everyone to get this, X-ray vision into your dog's personality.
Mhm.
And not only is it into their personality, but as co-creators, as teachers, it extends to our own self-discovery. And I want us to take a period of time and dive into the wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And maybe you could start with the macro view, and then we'll kind of just guide ourselves through each of the elements, if that's fine.
Yeah, great. So I like to think of the five element theory as this mindful guidance system that we have. And it's mindful for our dogs. It's mindful for horses and other pets and even goats. And, you can put it anywhere. That's certainly mindful for humans. That's a wonderful aspect. So you sort of get your training wheels on the animals, and then you move into the human world with this lens that is so powerful for creating compassion, empathy, understanding. And this is an ancient structure, so it's over 5,000 years old. And it's a nature-based structure. Nature to me that's how I grew up. My dad was very much a nature person. I didn't understand human beings at all. He grew up in a very challenging family with a lot of difficult challenges. So humans were this anomaly to me, but I understood nature. I understood every animal I approached. I learned how to put my hands on trees and feel vibrations and, all these wonderful things that made me who I am. So when I found the five element, as I was starting doing my healing work many, many, many moons ago, I just fell in love with it because it's all about nature. So when we talk about the elements, always refer back to nature and what nature is like in that element. So we're not just talking about sort of an archetypal box. We're talking about the nature and the effects. And it helps us learn and understand why dogs do what they do, why people do what they do. We're not going to talk that much about cats because I always say cats are cats. And cats, you need a PhD in five element to figure out who a cat is typically. So cats are amazing and they're wonderful. So basically, if we run through them really quick, the wood element is a spring element. And the wood element is, we're going to talk about dogs primarily, but think about humans as well that you might know. They're very determined. They're like army sergeants. They're often really good working dogs. They end up in the square world. They end up sort of in being police dogs, military dogs, protection dogs, and they're really solid, purposeful animals that are extremely determined. And if you think about springtime, everything is popping up out of the ground, right? So it has all this potential. And these animals have that potential. I mean, it's there. And so you have to learn to redirect that animal. And so they're always trying to redirect us. They'll become the leader. If you're not a good handler and a good leader, you're going to have a dog that takes over. And we won't go into too much more detail, but just knowing that connection about nature having so much potential in that springtime, that's part of a wood element's true nature in themselves. And then
before we get into fire, sorry, Elizabeth, didn't mean to interrupt you. I want to stay with this wood and this spiritual aspect of growth. What do you see when I know you're talking about like these military dogs and, whether we think of like a Belgian Malinois or German Shepherd, those type of dogs, as they're growing and learning so quickly, how does the owner handle that? Like you said, if you're not leading the growth, if you're not leading, what does that look like in an interplay of energies, if that makes sense, when we're mirroring each other?
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful. So the energies are powerful in these animals, and movement is their medicine. So energy wants to move. Energy isn't really stagnant. There maybe can be, but that's not always healthy. Energy wants to move. And that is in health, and using it for five element for health, we're moving energy with acupressure points, with acupuncture, all of that. So, and we're moving it to where we want it to go. in theory. Like we know, it's like bus stops. You get off the bus and you know where you're going from that bus. And that's sort of how acupressure works. And that's kind of how these dogs are. They need a direction. They want a direction. If they don't have a direction or a purpose, they're going to make one. And that's not always very pretty. So the energy can be very stressful. The emotion associated with the wood element is anger. And in human nature, anger is anger. In dog nature, it's aggression, it's overprotectiveness, it's frustration, it's impatience. So dogs don't really do anger, but they do all the products of anger. And so when we get that, we get this energy like this dog's just, okay, I got to go outside. I got to move. I got to do something. I want to learn something. I need you to be with me. And if the person is not prepared for that, they end up with a dog that's always sort of getting itself into trouble. Basically, it's either overprotecting the owner, being aggressive when people come up to the owner or the handler. So that's why they become such good working dogs. They're fearless too. Typically, they are absolutely fearless. So military dogs are profoundly fearless, and so aren't police dogs. And so that energy that's created is erratic and sort of like this. I don't know the words actually to describe it. It's a good question, but I know the feeling of it. I know when there's that resistance and that sort of aggressive kind of energy wanting to take over the other because you're not aggressive enough. You know what I mean? And the aggressiveness is imbalanced. So when we balance these animals and we smooth them out, they're amazing. And I've worked watching like police dogs and good handlers work with police dogs and military dogs as well. And they don't give them a big party when they do something right. They say from their heart, it's like, I can always feel this heart vibration. They go, good dog, good dog. Okay, let's move on. And that's it. And that's all that dog needs is to know, like, okay, heart likes what I did. I'm going to learn more, And a lot of dogs, they want to hear like, oh, good dog, and their people are like throwing treats at them. And the wood element doesn't need that. They just need to move forward. And a lot of times when we're working with wood element dogs, I've had personally some I've worked with, tons of them because they're wonderful competitors too. They're usually top-notch competitors. They're very athletic. But when you're working with them, you want to set boundaries, because when you think about aggressiveness and you think about all that potential, it needs a boundary somewhere to get really good at what it does. It needs to be hitting up against that boundary. And then when you feel like they're ready for the next step, because they'll just run, they'll just run with it and keep going. And they may not get that absolute potential, that direction of that potential properly. So you want to sort of set them up so they're good. And then, okay, here you go. And then they step out to theirs. And they love that. They really thrive in that way, because I think inside themselves, they know who they are. And they know they're a wood element and they have all this potential, and they want to do their best. They're amazing, actually amazing dogs. So, yeah.
That's crazy. I want to get into the fire, and I don't know if you refer to it as joy. Like, when I was reading about the fire, what type of dogs would be like fire? And can you kind of go into that a little bit on that element?
Yeah. And we don't, because dogs interbreed so much, it's hard to place breed placements, but like you did great with the wood Belgian Malinois, German Shepherds, Rottweilers. Those are often in that category, but we don't. It can also be a little small, Jack Russell Terrier wood element, So, but for fire dogs, they often have some red in them. So it's kind of funny. We can do this really well with horses. Horses we can type out often by their color, because there's only a few colors. There's gray, there's black, there's brown, and there's red, basically. So that's easier. But with dogs, they have so many colors. But the fire element is just about joy. You nailed it. It's all about joy. And they bring joy to people, and they want joy all the time. And so they're like joy, they're just sort of like
kind of like golden retrievers. or
Yeah.
yellow like fire. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, golden retrievers are that way, and a lot of border collies, although they're intensely intelligent. So we'll talk about metal in a minute, but they usually have a metal element right behind that. But I think the fire elements really just want everyone to be happy, everyone to be together in a good way, having fun. A fire element person is super social. So they're the ones when you're in a gathering maybe and people are in little groups and they're talking and then the door opens up and this person walks in and it's a fire element and everyone turns and they're like a magnet and they want to go talk to that person and they forget about all the other what they were saying and the other people they were talking to. It's just fire is like a magnet. It draws us in. And when we think about that in nature, thousands of years ago, fire kept us warm. It cooked our food suddenly so we weren't dying of bacteriums. It became such a pivotal part of man and womankind and humankind period that we are actually drawn to fire. You see somebody starting a campfire in the next campground, well then usually the next campground starts a fire too, and it's like time maybe because the light's thinning and it's getting darker, but it's sort of like it's just very much a magnet. And many wonderful memories are made around fires, and that can be in whether you're in the conscious world and you're talking about some really deep stuff or whether you're toasting a marshmallow. You can remember those memories for a long time. So it's a really big place marker. And the interesting thing about fire dogs is people remember them long after they die. And so they pass on and the body passes on, but their fire spirit stays in the heart of all those people. And one of the organs for the fire element is the heart. And we talk about sense organs in the 5-element theory for each element, but I always think so for the fire element, the sense organ is the tongue. So these dogs lick a lot, they lick people. And it's sort of like they're getting a taste of who they are, kind of. And they bark. So you can't bark without your tongue. So they're barkers. I like to think that their heart is their true sense organ. And I think it carries into other people's hearts so freely and so easily. It's so beautiful. I mean, this is so beautiful. And these are the dogs that get separation anxiety a lot because people will leave them home and they're alone and they don't know what to do. So they rip down walls or they tear up couches and dog beds and, and they're unhappy unless they're around others. And I always say with nature and fire cooked our food, warmed us, but it can also be a forest fire. So that's when we get into that piece of, what we call in Chinese medicine, the disturbance of the Shen. And what happens is the Shen is the spirit and the mind, and it's housed in the heart. And that's how the Chinese believe about that. And so the heart holds the fire. And when the heart fire starts to get big and excess, it goes up into the mind, and then they become panicky. They get strong anxiety. They get really stressed. They get overstimulated, and they're hard to handle. They're just kind of like, and they really do freak out. And that's when we have to step in as grounded human beings and just notice that, get really quiet, feel your feet on the ground, take one big breath at least, and walk over to that dog and quiet them down. And what we're doing is we're putting that heart fire that's now up here back down into the heart where it belongs. And how we do that, the easy, simple way, besides grounding them and being quiet with them and talking quiet, is right here is my very favorite point in the whole world. It's called yin tong. It's right between our eyebrows. And this can settle anyone that's having a panic attack, dog or human. It's really wonderful for that. And you just get up in here between your eyebrows and you just kind of rub gently, quietly and gently on these animals. And you can watch them just like, and they come back down. It moves that point moves the heart fire back into the heart. So energetically, we work with that a lot. When I see a new patient, and if that dog's kind of anxious or stressed and it's got a lot going on, that's one of the first things I do while I'm talking to the owner is I manage to get over here and I just start rubbing that spot on the dog's right between the eyes. And the dog literally goes like this, and just calms right down. And then I can work on the animals. So it's an interesting, sort of dramatic at times, but beautiful, heartful filled relationship you can have with these fire dogs, and I've had people ask me 10, 12 years later, or not ask me, but say, gosh, I really miss Louie, which was one of my fire dogs, or I really miss Sage, or, one of these dogs that have a huge fire element. And people just remember them. That's the essence. That's that spirit just hanging out there in their hearts. So, yeah, pretty cool, pretty fun.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I want to go into the earth, the nurturing aspect. And like whenever somebody thinks of a dog being nurturing, what does that play out like with earth?
They love family. So think about like a kid loving dog, those big yellow labs and even black labs. And they're just, they love everybody. They greet people. And I always have a joke of, if a burglar came in and went through the window, the earth dog would show them where everything was, just because they are so kind and they are so caring and they're so generous with who they are, with love and affection. And they're happiest. They're kind of slow, but they do. When you think about our earth is nurturing all of us, right? And we need to do some work nurturing it. We know that, but our earth is what nurtures us and allows us to be here. So everything on earth allows us to be here. So earth is this incredible being, if it's an animal or a human, that is always going to take care of you and always going to take care of someone. Or, the human world, they can be excess caretakers. In the dog world, they are often really good service dogs. So they do wonderful, wonderful work with that. Reading with rover dogs, that are detecting. They have great noses, as all dogs do, but they can detect disease really well. And they're not real driven to work like some of the other elements, but they will. They will because they have such a will to actually caretake for. So they're really wonderful dogs, for older people to get to. They're hanging out with them because they like to hang out. They rather lay on the ground than go and, and run an agility course or something. They're usually not very good at all of that part. They just want to be with people and animals and do that. Yeah, it's a lovely, generous animal. Yeah. And then we move into metal, which is the autumn. So fire is summer, earth is late summer. That's its season. And then metal is in the autumn. And metal is purposeful. These animals are purposeful. These are the Jack Russells that don't give up on ratting. And the animals that just really need a purpose. And they're highly intelligent. They're not very flexible. So when you think about metal in nature, we mine metal from the ground. It's hard as a rock, and it literally is a rock. And then we create these hard structures that are extremely purposeful, that build skyscrapers and cars. And so when you think about metal dogs, just think about that incredible potential for purposefulness. These dogs, their sense organ is the nose. So these are the best search and rescue dogs. They'll go hours and hours and hours and hours. And, they're driven to be purposeful. So it's beautiful. And because they're inflexible, they don't always trust as well as they could. Other dogs will forgive and forget a little bit, or maybe just forgive. Metal dogs have a little bit of a problem if their handler does something that doesn't trust them, that they don't trust, they don't forget. So they have an incredible memory for all sorts of information and data, and they don't forget those things. So it can be a little challenge with human and dog if you're not living up to that dog's expectations, literally, for what it should be doing, what it should be learning. It's really interesting like that. It's almost like who's the teacher, and we all, I think every element we can say that, who is the teacher here? So, yeah. So they're interesting. Their energy is direct and just sort of in motion, it feels like, and then they kind of crash. They go and they hide. They're not a dog to lay around in a dog bed in the living room with you or jump on the couch. They're usually ones that go into a back room and they just, ah, and they just, release all that driven energy they've been working with all day. So yeah, they're interesting. They're wonderful for,
Yeah, I love that.
yeah, they're great for people that have, even if they're not going to be a working dog, which is what they really should be, they're wonderful for people that like to hike long distances and things like that.
Mm.
Mountains, any kind of mountaineering or, rock scrambling, anything like that. These dogs will get it done. They're really good with that and agile, typically. Even though they're not flexible, they're agile. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And then, finally the water, which is wisdom. And I know we're going to talk a little bit later about all dogs, in their later life with water and wisdom. But what does it look like what am I thinking of when I think of like a water dog? I mean, I think of like a lab or something like that. Is it dogs that are drawn to water? Is that what that is?
No, not really. They're like water. So, I always call them shapeshifters because water shapes itself. So driving right into nature, water shapeshifts in all kinds of ways. You can look at a blade of grass and there's a tiny drop of water on it. You can watch rainfall. You can see, watch a tsunami and see this powerful wall of water. You can go to a quiet pool or a pond and just see your reflection in it and see that. And that's one thing that a water dog does best is reflect who we are. And so water can be snow. You think about all the shapes of water and all of the ways it supports us. So it's very supportive to our own personal deep growth. It wants to see us moving forward. It wants to see us learning who we are on all levels, spiritual, mental, physical. It's just full of all that wisdom. And, I always say without water in this world, we wouldn't be alive. We wouldn't be in these bodies. And so water is an essential thing. And a lot of times these animals come to people and they're not ready for them. So they're rehomed often. Their emotion is visceral fear. It's not just fear, it's visceral fear, the fear that, if they hear a loud noise, because hearing is their sense, then they will, pull the leash out of your hand, run down the road and be hard to catch. And so, and those kinds of dogs, it breaks the connection with the owner and there's a mistrust there. And so a lot of times if that keeps happening, something like that, or, they're just in visceral fear all the time, then most owners don't want that. They want to go have fun with their dogs. And so they end up being rehomed a lot. So, but when you go in,
You think that is I'm sorry, but do you think that is like a reflection or a mirror of fear? So a lot of the rehoming would be, I don't want to have to deal with the fears that are inside of me because those fears, are masks.
yeah.
I don't want to have to deal with that. And now I'm seeing it projected onto a dog. I could imagine that would be a rehoming situation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I know we'll probably talk about sort of soul packs and, things like that where these animals come into our life for a reason. And I always tell someone when they say, "Oh, I saw this dog. I think it's a water dog, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that." And I just always say, I think you're ready for it because you're asking the question. So go get that dog and, call me if you have any questions. And I think that they come into our lives regularly. I've had many. I'm a water element myself, primarily. And just really quick, a quick note is we all have 5 elements. We all have them. And it's just how much percentage you have of each one. In the book I wrote, we did quizzes, and we have a lot of information in there that directs, and people are always going, uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, that's that dog. That's that dog, but the quizzes really sink it in. So it's a series of questions, and you just number them, and then you know what your primary element is. So we made it super simple for that. But
Can I ask a personal question on this, since you're water and it's wisdom? How does the fear and the wisdom, is there an alchemy with that?
oh,
It, if there's a lot of fear, how is there a lot of wisdom? And then how does that work back and forth? Does the fear have to be there to gain the wisdom? How do those two correspond?
I think that the last thing you said is absolutely correct. I think the fear has to be introduced to you or the animal and have them work through it and be able to manage that. If they're sensing fear in their person, in their human, all the time, the stress level is so high for that animal that they will always perpetuate fear. And some of these soul contracts will go on into a whole nother lifetime. I mean, where another dog shows up for another person, and it's really that same soul need to get through this wounding. And it often, most water elements, I would say 99% most, have had traumatic beginnings when they come into this life, and probably traumatic karma prior to this life as well. And so you step into this world, and how are you going to deal with it now? And so that traumatic beginning is really it's sort of an indicator. So I have a Pretzel. She's only 3, but she's a water element. I'm sorry, excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of water here.
Oh, go ahead, yeah.
And she was born under a drug house, and her mother had no milk. She was starved, and she had dead siblings all around her. And who knows what kind of environment she was hearing from above, and all the stress and everything. And a rescue organization went in. There were only 3 puppies left out of 8, I believe. And so the rest were laying around, dead. And she was the hardest one to catch because the other 2 were males. So the males, are usually a little easier to catch than females. Females seem to be a little smarter about tactics. And her catch was hard. So she had a really bad start, and she is deathly afraid of humans. She now is up to about maybe 8 humans that she lets touch her, which is good. And she's curious about them now. So it's taken this long time to really get her to adapt. We walk on the beach here in Washington a lot, and if she sees a human down at the end of the beach, she doesn't do the visceral fear until she gets close. And then that now is starting to happen after she maybe walks 10 to 20 feet away from them. Then after, it's like, okay, get me in the car, or, we got to go faster, or, so it shows up later. So there's this whole process of, I'm watching her go through stages of fear and how she's learning to adapt and then move on. And it takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of sensitivity and presence to be able to work with that. And if it was a male dog and she wasn't she's highly, highly sensitive, and she's really tuned into all kinds of interesting things. But if it was a male dog, we might move along a little faster. Male dogs, for some reason, aren't that sensitive as a female will be. And so, and that's a whole nother huge story. But I think that we all have to learn and distill that wisdom through experiences. My personal experience, I won't go into detail, but I found in my world, I had to have no fear. So I turned fear off for many years, and I did all kinds of fun, brave, wonderful athletic endeavors and things like that. And I had no fear. And then I started getting some injuries, and I went to a Chinese doctor who became one of my mentors. And he said, "Aren't you a water element?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Except when I'm not, because we can shapeshift, right? We shapeshift into all the elements." And he said, "Well, you're supposed to have fear. Where's your fear? You're doing all these crazy things and having all this fun, but you're breaking yourself. So you have no fear." And I said, You're right. I have no fear. Well, I also work with large animals in pain. So if I had fear all the time, I would be stressing those animals out, So I had completely turned off my fear. So now I'm learning to live with fear. I'm learning what fear is all about, which is really interesting. So I think water elements can, that's just a phase of sort of my wisdom that's backwards from most water elements that have the visceral fear. So I haven't touched into the visceral yet, but I imagine at some point I'll learn about that a little bit too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Before we get into because I want to get into rescue dogs. But before we get into rescue dogs, because I know a lot of people have questions on that audience, I do want to ask a fun question in the sense of when you go to first meet a dog, or you're thinking of getting a dog, or whether you go to a shelter or whether you go to somebody that has the dog and a friend, or how it all works out. However, from a spiritual standpoint, what are some things that you can do to prepare yourself to meet? And then are there things that you can do to see how the bond is? Like, because we always look at the dogs like, oh, the dog is cute, the dog likes me. It's all that superficial, if that makes sense. What are some things that people can do, some practical things that they can do to make sure that there's a soul bond there?
Yeah. There's certain elements you can know right away you're going to bond with. But I think the biggest thing for the human aspect is be present and be grounded. Because if you're not grounded and you're all up in your head and you're going, oh, that's a cute dog. Oh, I could do agility with that dog, or I could do this with that dog.
And
Just everything in your mind, your body, feel your feet on the ground, breathe, walk around, and just, I don't know, a lot of times now we don't get to go in and see dogs in kennels like we used to. We used to walk through the kennels and go, oh, I want that one. I want that one.
then
So I think that it's a little bit different the way they're managing it now. But if you're seeing them outdoors, just watch them and don't think so much. I think the thinking gets in the way all the time of what your heart really wants to say. Your heart is your voice. And it's your primary sense organ, and your brain is not. And so we process things through our brain first, then our heart second. And we're supposed to do it the other way around. So we're supposed to process through our heart.
Oh, good. Your heart is your voice. That's so good.
Yeah. And then you let your brain deal with what your heart said. So I think when we learn to do that, we learn to switch that mechanism like it's supposed to be, like it was, 50,000 years ago when we met our first dog. It was all about heart. There wasn't a lot of brain thought there. There wasn't a lot of noise in there. And, there were no cell phones to look up the breed type. And is this going to be good for what I want to do? And so really the heart, I think, is the biggest one. Because if you can go in and your heart goes, oh, I really want that dog, you're going to be able to manage any elemental issue. You're going to be able to manage everything in the best way you can. And knowing that, there's some practical things like knowing that you can feed this animal, care for this animal, make sure this animal gets plenty of outdoor time, fresh air, movement, fun, and you're not leaving them home for 8 hours every single day. Somehow they're getting what they need and want, because that's what balances the energy in the element, is to get their needs and wants met. And that's what the book is all about. This is what this animal needs, wants, and this is the stressor. And so when they don't get their needs and wants met, then the stressor really shows up. And that's why, I'm really working hard. Matter of fact, in a week or so, I go to Humane Society Expo in Las Vegas, which is not my favorite place, but by any means. I tend to blow out light bulbs there. But yeah, but it's a huge expo, and I have some meetings with people in the rescue world, because I did that last year, and I went, what do you think about this? I think we can rehome and permanently rehome these dogs easier if they understand what they're getting into with what their wants, needs, and stressors are. In other words, what element is this dog and does it fit me? So that's the other way. There's the heart thing, and there's the mind says, can a 75-year-old man bring in a 3-year-old wood dog? That would be a disaster. That's a dog full of potential, right? And what is it going to do? The dog's going to protect him protect that person from everybody because it's going to find their job and they're going to, so not the best mix, unless he lives in the middle of, somewhere where it's dangerous, then that's probably okay. But what's the chance of that? And so I think balancing the human, that's why I put humans in the second part of the book. So you can figure out who are you and what's your lifestyle like and like, and how does that fit with that dog? And we have all this weaving, like what does a wood and a fire look like? You had sent me a question, Jason, and it was about let's see, I forget how you worded it, but it was wonderful. Let me find it for you. It's really quick.
Yeah, go ahead, find it.
Let's see. I think I wrote that one down. It was hang on one second. So number 7. It was number 7.
Dance of creation and control.
Yeah, the dance of creation and control. And that's, that's how these elements function. And we can go through that if we want. But there are 2 cycles, creation and control. And for all the elements, they interact. And that's how we balance creation. If you create too much energy in one thing, then you need control to not go over the top with that. It's sort of like drinking 12 cups of coffee and then trying to sleep. It's not going to work. So drink 2 cups of coffee in the morning and then allow yourself to sleep. So there's always a balance. We're always striving for balance in the elements. And my ex-husband, my first husband, was a fire element and very classic fire. Everybody loved him. He got all the attention when we went anywhere, and it was all good. I was fine because I'm the water element, right? But the water controls fire in the co-cycle. I found when I was starting to learn, this is back in like the late 80s, early 90s, I was learning about 5-element theory. And I was like, I think that I am constantly trying to control Gary. And I'm not a control freak by any means, but for some reason, I feel like I need to control him all the time. And so, long story short, our marriage didn't last, but it lasted a long time. But there was always that dynamic of water trying to control fire. It's just this innate being. And so those cycles really come into play. And in the book describes them well, but that's a great example of, is this the right mix? No, it's not. And now I'm married to a wood element. And so water feeds wood. Water helps wood grow and helps wood be dynamic, its dynamic self. And I'm okay with that. So so it's interesting. It's all interesting when you just the book tells you a lot about it. And when you get to read through it and kind of pause, that's what a lot of my clients have said. I had to pause right here. So I was really thinking on this and this and this and thinking about how it's in my life. So it's a big reflection of a lot of different things we've gone through, not just with our animals, but with ourselves and other humans. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to get into, because I know you just talked about your 3-year-old rescue dog. Somebody that has a rescue dog, you've had 17 or have 17 rescue dogs in your life. Yes. And it's a karmic mirror. You talk about how stress can actually, how you can see stress and then it creates a balance. For those that take a rescue dog, not, and I wanted to approach it from 2 sides, not just how to handle practical, rescue dog, but how the dog mirrors our karmic lessons and how it helps us face our own wounds.
Yeah. I think, and we kind of started that a little while back. I think that when we listen with our heart, the heart chooses what it wants to work on in those karmic wounds. And so the animal comes and they come into the mix. And so, again, just using Pretzel as example, again, here's a dog that had a similar sort of upbringing to my early years, and not upbringing, but birth time, birth and those pivotal early years. And it was interesting because I thought I didn't see the wound until a couple weeks ago. And for some reason I was thinking about my mom, because I'm writing this old dog book now. And I was writing a chapter on Groundhog Day because she had dementia. So I was talking about Groundhog Day, Groundhog Day, Groundhog Day. So because they're repetitive, every day's kind of the same, and same questions, same dialogues. And I was thinking about my mom, and suddenly it just popped in my head in this quiet vein of contemplation that, oh, well, that's why Pretzel came into my life, because we have the same karmic wounds. We have a mother that didn't care for us, basically, and so and had, it wasn't like her mom couldn't try to care for her. She tried because 3 of the puppies lived, but so that was really interesting to me. I have a friend, Tammy Billups. She's an author. She wrote 4 books, and she specifically works with soul wounding with animals and humans, and she's done that for about 30 years. She's amazing. Tammy Billups is her name, and just wonderful. I was writing a review for her latest book at the same time in that same day. So I think that's why that just happened to pop out of my being, like, oh, that's it. That's why Pretzel is here. So it's a healing in itself when you recognize what those wounds are and how you've navigated them through the years and how your animal is navigating. And oftentimes when we fix our karmic wounds and we finally have this aha moment about them and we work with them in whatever way form that is, it might be, it might be just working with it in yourself or someone going to a therapist or whatever it is. But the animals, then it just drops away from the animals. And so I think they're here to help mirror that for sure. It's just kind of tried and true. And we just have to kind of do the work they're there to facilitate, and we're there to do the work, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that karmic wounding.
So, you talked about something about, with touch, routine, quiet presence, finding balance, and those things are what's balancing to a dog's touch, routine, and quiet presence. The sacred act of co-creation, where we're aligning both our energies, dog, human, and we're aligning it with a higher order. I think that's where you start to get the healing that begins to happen, because both have a higher self. So, when then the higher selves begin to align, of course, there's going to be healing.
Right, right. And I think humans are so diverse. There's still, they will always be a conundrum to me. It's in a good way. Um, but I think that everyone's at a different level. I don't think you could find 2 people that were at the same level with that of the ability to co-create. So it's so dynamic to have 2 personalities of a dog and a human co-creating together. It's always going to be a little bit different, but it's the most beautiful process you can do. And every dog has a huge meaning. I've written some articles, and I'm going to write for the UK. It hasn't come out yet for a big holistic magazine, but it's about timekeepers. So I call them timekeepers. So these animals have a place in time in our life. They're like a chapter of our life. We have all these memories, not just with the animal, but memories of other things that equivalent with that time we had that dog. It's really fascinating when you think about it. And there's such wisdom keepers, and so extracting all that wisdom from that time is a really amazing process. It's really interesting. And I was thinking about that the other day and kind of feeling through it. And I had another water dog, Cedar, who had a bad start, but she was my heart dog. Women always say, you have one heart dog and then you have all the other dogs that you love in abundance, but there's always one dog that really connects with you. And so Cedar was the one. And she and at the time, I was doing some wildlife biology work. So I was tromping around in fields and forests and mountains, trying to work on a project for something where they were going to build 14,000 homes. And my professor at the time had put me on that project. And I ended up, Cedar was with me every day, all day. And she was a great dog. And she found a lot of my stuff that I needed to classify as, an area that we needed to save because there was this plant or there was this through here that was regularly used by a mountain lion or there's a coyote den right there or all these things. So we found all this stuff together and it was so much fun. It's so much fun when you're doing that with your dog because you're not thinking and but you're communicating the whole time. It's so beautiful. There's no words. It's just you're both kind of sniffing, and doing hearing each other. And so she found a Pacific pocket mouse, which was an endangered species. And she sat there and she waited for me and I called her. She was, I don't know, maybe I was about maybe an eighth of a mile away from her or something. And I called her and she wouldn't come. And that was her alert. She would sit down when she found something, she would sit. And usually she would come if I called her. So she was one of the best dogs I ever had with just being by my side all the time. And she was sitting there. So I went over and I looked and there was a little hole and there was a dead mouse. And sure enough, that was the endangered species. And so she kind of fulfilled a wish for me to find, yes, we found an endangered species. We keyed it out. I'm making this a short story and we keyed it out and it was indeed a Pacific pocket mouse, which had regulations on it that we had to save a certain amount of land for that and that there were probably other ones in the region as well. So years later, after Cedar passed, I was working on a horse in a barn and a woman said to me, it was the first time I'd met her. She was a brand new client. And she said, I think I have something on my desk that is got your name on it. And I said, oh, what do you do? And she said, well, I manage this. It was Rancho Michiveo, this large tract of land, and it's slated for development. And I said, you did? I said, you definitely have my report on there. That's so amazing. So this horse interplay was really interesting. And she said, well, I want you to let you know that we saved this huge mitigation bank property because you found a Pacific pocket mouse. And I said, no, my dog found the Pacific pocket mouse. My dog Cedar needs to be on that too because she wasn't a report, and she was my working partner. And she said, oh, that's so sweet. I'll write that, I'll make sure that's in the publicity part of it. And so, but it was so interesting. Here's this dog that shows up in my life, my heart dog. My heart's in environmental causes anyway, wanting to balance nature as much as we possibly can. And here this dog showed up in my life and found a dream, and it was amazing, so you never know what they're all about and what your relationships are about. But that space in time was when I really realized about these dogs as timekeepers in our life, all the
yeah, that's so great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're coming on the hour, Elizabeth, and I want to ask one more last question, and I think this is really important when it comes to people understanding that dogs, and you talk about this in your book, dogs feel all of our vibrations, like all of them. From a spiritual perspective, and I know you wrote that. What do you feel like you could leave people with? And understanding the emotion, spiritual, the physical, the mental, all of our capacity as a human. When you say all of our vibrations, what are these animals feeling from us?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that they feel all our stress. They feel our happiness. They feel our pain. They feel it all. And they're, they domesticated with us now for 50,000 years. So it's natural to think that they feel us. What I wish for us is that without overloading ourselves, that we could feel the same for them and for other humans, which would be really challenging. I'm an empath, so I often feel things. If I'm in a grocery store line, I'm like, ooh, who's got that, or who's got that pain, or who's got that heart pain, or who's stressing out back there, and I feel like the animals have that tenfold. I can turn it off if I need to. I could put up some boundaries. I've seen dogs with boundaries from humans that are always stressed and they just turn off. Oftentimes the earth dogs will do that. They'll just sort of turn off where they really want that beautiful integration of, oh, what are you feeling? Oh, I'm sorry, you're sad. Let me come over and hang out with you, or um it's I think if we could take responsibility for our own hearts and our own minds, we could smooth that pathway for our dogs to really have a wonderfully loving, fulfilling life that fulfills their element and keeps it balanced. And it really just takes us embracing understanding. And that's what the book's about. And understanding others, understanding life, not being in the mind so much. The mind is a gift we have on the top of these shoulders, and it's amazing. But we spend way too much time in it, and we need to spend more time in our hearts and in our conscious energy around us. Really, really recognizing that. So for the dogs, I would ask that, listen to yourself and hear yourself, because I can hear you loudly and sometimes it gets old, like sometimes it gets tiring and oh gosh, so yeah, I think
I
that
love it. It's, Elizabeth, one of the beautiful things about your book, and like I said, everybody needs to get it. Know Your Dog's True Nature. We'll have the link below. Is I think it allows, it's so funny how, whether you believe in God, universe, whatever, creator, it allows this whole idea of healing, and us learning, and it's a sacred map. I think it allows us to have nature and animals and humans and that trinity for us to heal, and so if you look at your dog in that way as you co-creating together and evolving spiritually, and I think if that could be the emphasis of what your book teaches, how many healthy relationships will we have? Not just with humans, but with animals,
right, and with our world, because that
Right.
that gets put aside, and we are nature. Like we're not separate from nature. We are nature. So
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
taking care of nature in all aspects.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for being on the HDL podcast. This was amazing. I so appreciate it. And like I said, we'll make sure that Know Your Dog's True Nature. Every person that listens to the HDL podcast, we want them. If you own a dog, you need to own this book. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason.